This is the people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning! Warning!
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all!
See how the trouble you've started?
Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it. Right! You tell them I'm coming! And hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio.
We may be an island here, but we have as a worse immigration problem here than you guys do in the US. I may be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure that we have a bigger problem of immigration here. And it goes back to really about the 50s and the 60s when we first started to let in early arrivals from the West Indies and Pakistan, India, Bangladesh. I mean, where I used to live in Harrow, I think 1 in 7 people now who in that borough, and this would be typical of large proportions of London. London on the whole now, people who describe themselves as white British are a minority. 1 in 7 people are born outside of the UK. Many of them coming from Bangladesh and India. I mean, where I lived, it was just saturated with brown people. And again, it's not that I have anything against brown people. They're in the wrong place. They're in a country which is historically and exclusively been white dominant, and white people should have a place to call their home as well. No one invited them here. This was always imposed by corrupt, perfidious, treasonous political elites at the hands of international Jewry and world Zionism largely. For instance, in the 1962 Commonwealth Act, I'm taking this from Douglas Murray's book, The Strange Death of Europe, which is a disingenuous or a ill-informed title. This was completely deliberate. The 1962 Commonwealth Immigrants Act, which ostensibly aimed to limit the flow of migrants. This is, I'm picking this up here after there was sort of outrage against this early push of immigration, which ostensibly aimed to limit the flow of migrants and persuade some to return home, had the opposite effect, persuading many immigrants to bring their entire families into the United Kingdom, while they, as they saw it, had the chance. And this is happening now as well with the Brexit, when they keep delaying at this free movement of people thing and allowing these ex-communist countries from the EU, the Eastern European countries, to stay here. You know, not all of them, some of them are going back, but many of them will be bringing their families here while they've got the chance. It's just a repeat of this same situation back then. The fact that the Commonwealth immigrants no longer had to have a job to come to after 1962 caused another upsurge. It was not until the 1971 Immigration Act that there were any further attempts to stem the resulting flow. So despite the fact that there had never been any plan to allow migration on such a scale, governments of all stripes found themselves forced to deal with the consequences of the situation in which they and the British people found themselves. It was a situation no one had ever accurately predicted, but which had repercussions that every subsequent government would have to react to. And again, it must be understood that Douglas Murray comes at this as if it was incompetence. I mean, we hear this all the time about our leaders. You know, decade after decade, it's incredible that this narrative and this thinking that the problem is incompetence. It's preposterous, really. and it's exasperating and irritating. No one could be that stupid. And if they are, then what the hell are they doing leading the country? Surely we can find more intelligent leaders. It's corruption and conspiracy. It's deliberate. It's not the strange death of Europe. It's the deliberate destruction of Europe and the deliberate attempt to replace the native peoples of Europe and the UK. Man, have they done a good job of it so far. The British people recognised that there were issues arising from large-scale immigration, but they also showed that they knew the answer to not lie with, as this writer calls it, extremists who had perpetrators of this mass immigration movement, considering they've pretty much irrevocably altered the demographic and subsequently cultural and ethnic anatomy of Europe and the UK. That's extreme to do that in half a century. That is biblical proportions of demographic shifts. And the traffic's only one way, folks. They're all coming here at the same time. It's overwhelming. As much as it is kind of, brings to mind cosmic biblical scale imagery, it is also simple mathematics and demographics. Demographics is destiny. I'm doing a video today, actually. I'll finish it off either tonight or tomorrow morning. Immigration, demographics is destiny, and that unveils who is behind a lot of this immigration stuff. Obviously, I've covered a lot of this on the show. Go to break in a minute, folks. Do support Revolution Radio. Go to the Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com homepage. You can donate there. You can also subscribe to the archives for $5.95. It's not a huge amount of money, but you get a lot of content there. So go and subscribe, subscribe to the archives and support Revolution Radio. We are dedicated here to free speech, and there's nothing that's censored on this network, which is refreshing. If you want to support the work I do, you can do that on PayPal, Stevenson_P5 at sky.com. You will find videos up there of people like E. Michael Jones, Gerald Salenti, Kevin McDonald from the Occidental Observer. Lots of stuff on there, great interviews. And as I say, you can donate to my show. It's much appreciated. PayPal, Stevenson_P5 at sky.com. And my YouTube is just Paul Stevenson, Stevenson. I will be back in about a couple of minutes, folks. Until then. Anyway, if you've just joined me, I've been breaking down immigration and been discussing the whole globalist/internationalist battle against nationalism. It is in many ways what the West is engaged in at the minute, in this warfare that we're seeing with Trump and his difficulties and almost incessant resistance to the idea of building this wall, and what we're facing here with trying to rid ourselves, trying to free ourselves of the dictatorship entanglement of the so-called European Union. And I was breaking down about immigration. Obviously, a big part of what the wall is for is to prevent this increased immigration into the US, and also a big part of why many of us, including myself, voted to get out of the EU was to stop free movement of people and stop the plundering and raping of our country and the invasion of our country, which is also known as multiculturalism. It's a dangerous word, multiculturalism, because it is a smokescreen for essentially your country being invaded. At least in a traditional invasion, you know you're being invaded. That's why this nonsense is so dangerous and sadly, tragically, has been so effective. And I talked earlier about just the sheer numbers and the sheer scale of immigration into the UK and Europe in recent years. It just the movement of peoples into the West, into Europe and the UK has been staggering. And I used biblical scale analogy, or an analogy to portray this idea of just how huge and dramatic it is. So many countries coming here at the same time, and it may sound like, I'm being dramatic, but have a listen to Nigel Farage, and he was talking to earlier last year, I think in the autumn or the fall, as you guys call it, to Lord Green from Migration Watch UK. If this doesn't concern you, then I don't know what will. Of course, many of the loony far left and the Marxist left, who the citizens of nowhere or citizens of everywhere, open borders and all the rest of it, they're not too concerned, of course, but sane adult and more wise heads are, of course, alarmed and very concerned about this, which again is why the Trump was successful because in getting into the White House, in no small part because he promised to deal with immigration, build that wall, and in no small part why many of us, it was a huge influential factor anyway, voted to get out of the EU to stop free movement of people, at least within the EU. It doesn't deal with the Arabs and the African countries and all the rest of it, and the Indians, but it was a step in the right direction, as we saw it over here, to try and prevent this country from completely losing its identity. Now, here's Nigel Farage talking to Lord Green from Migration Watch UK. And you will see that I'm not exaggerating when I say it's an almost irrevocable alteration, and subsequently to the cultural and ethnic anatomy of the UK.
Well, they're talking today about a no-deal Brexit. I don't believe it for a moment. I think Philip Hammond has let the cat out of the bag by saying it would have catastrophic, awful consequences. And Jacob Rees-Mogg has responded in a way that we just heard from Stephen Swinford from The Telegraph. It's open civil war on Brexit in the Tory party. But you know something? One thing they're not talking about, they're just not discussing immigration. They find it too awkward. They find it too embarrassing. I, of course, have tried to talk about immigration, and I've talked about the rise in population on this show, the effect on living standards, and many of you think I'm sort of making it up. Well, I have said to you before that I thought over 2/3 of the population growth in this country was directly due to immigration and the irresponsible policies I believe we followed since the turn of the century. But don't take it from me. Let's get the absolute facts and figures. I'm going to go next to Lord Green of Deddington, and he is chairman of Migration Watch, former ambassador to Syria, former director of the Middle East in the Foreign Office, an experienced diplomat. Andrew, good evening. Are you with me?
Good evening. Yes, I am, Nigel.
Good. So, firstly, can you just explain to us how much our population has increased since the turn of the century?
Well, it's increased by about 8 million.
8 million?
What we've come from 2001 to, let me reach for the number, 2001, the total...
Well...
Apologies, folks. I lost connection briefly. Unfortunately, it happens from time to time with modern Wi-Fi and everything else. But in case you missed it, I was breaking down just how alarming and just how dramatic and overwhelming the demographic shift has been into the UK with immigration. I mean, it really is staggering and shocking. With Nigel Farage talking to Lord Green, he was the chairman of the Migration Watch UK. Here it is again.
They're talking today about a no-deal Brexit. I don't believe it for a moment. I think Philip Hammond has let the cat out of the bag by saying it would have catastrophic, awful consequences. And Jacob Rees-Mogg has responded in a way that we just heard from Stephen Swinford from The Telegraph. It's open civil war on Brexit in the Tory party. But you know something? One thing they're not talking about, they're just not discussing immigration. They find it too awkward. They find it too embarrassing. I, of course, have tried to talk about immigration, and I've talked about the rise in population on this show, the effect on living standards, and many of you think I'm sort of making it up. Well, I have said to you before that I thought over 2/3 of the population growth in this country was directly due to immigration and the irresponsible policies I believe we followed.
You see, Nigel frames this as irresponsible, and this is consistent with his view, or his at least public view and expression about immigration and all sorts of problems, including around Brexit, etc., that it's incompetence in many cases. And as I said earlier, nobody can be that stupid. It's clearly deliberate and conspiratorial. But I think anybody, Nigel may be fighting the establishment, but he's still within the establishment. It's like he's not doing a radio show on Revolution Radio or Jeff Rents. He's doing a radio show on LBC. And he is still, churning out this line that it's incompetence and, as he said, they're irresponsible. I mean, yeah, of course it's irresponsible, but the insinuation there is that they're well-meaning. When it's actually deliberate. It's the same with Douglas Murray, who I was reading earlier, with the strange death of Europe. Well, if you're properly informed, then there's nothing strange about it. It's absolutely deliberate. And so he's either ill-informed or he's disingenuous. And there's parts of that book where he goes down, he mentions Barbara Roche, an East End Jew, and then he backs away from that because he wouldn't get the book published. So these guys, in many ways, whether they like it or not, or they like to be called it, or or if people who like these people like it or not, they're controlled opposition. If you're not going to name the enemy and pinpoint who's doing what and what's behind it, then it is controlled opposition.
Since the turn of the century. But don't take it from me. Let's get the absolute facts and figures. I'm going to go next to Lord Green of Deddington, and he is chairman of Migration Watch, former ambassador to Syria, former director of the Middle East in the Foreign Office, an experienced diplomat. Andrew, good evening. Are you with me?
Good evening. Yes, I am, Nigel.
Good. So, firstly, can you just explain to us how much our population has increased since the turn of the century?
Well, it's increased by about 8 million.
8 million?
What we've come from 2001 to, let me reach for the number, 2001.
The majority of them are in London. As I said earlier, we should build a frickin' wall around London.
The total increase was 6.6 million.
6.6 million.
6.6 million between 2001 and 2016.
Yeah.
But what we have done for the first time, I think, is to make the first proper calculation of how much of that increase was down to immigration. Now, some of that is obvious. The number of migrants is known. The number of children who came with them is known. But what nobody had calculated was how many children they had had after their arrival. Now,
it says nobody has calculated, but I can assure you, folks, that those who are behind this whole invasion, they would have calculated this. That's why they are hell-bent on delaying the Brexit as long as they can to get as many people in here as possible and to allow as many immigrants in within the ex-communist countries in to the UK as well, because they know that they're going to have a lot of children, and you can be guaranteed they've factored that in, even if our mainstream media haven't factored it in, or think tanks or whatever.
These children are not migrants, of course, because they were born here, but clearly they've added to our population. So when you do that proper calculation, which frankly the government could easily have done and never did, what we found was that in that 15-year period, 82% of our population increase, 82% was down to immigration. I mean, it's just astonishing.
So that's 5.5 million, roughly.
Yes, 5.4 million, exactly. What that means is that immigration is adding to our population 1 million people every 3 years.
And that's the ones that we know about, and that's the ones, again, that are in sort of mainstream, in quotes, researched immigration figures. Obviously, Lord Green here would be one of the better ones from Migration Watch UK, but there's a lot of illegal immigration into this country as well.
It is down to immigration. I mean, it's absolutely astonishing. And so, as you said at the beginning just now, it's really not possible to talk about the impact on housing or roads or schools or whatever, unless you recognize that a major cause of it, 80%, 82%, is down to immigration. And just to take one example, housing, you may know that we will have to build a new home every 5 minutes, night and day, just to house new migrants. That's the scale of it.
Can you explain to me, Lord Green, and I am completely with you on this, the impact on, and you didn't even mention traffic on the roads, because of course, 2.5 million new car or more cars in the space of the last 5 years is again directly linked to the size of population. Why?
Folks, I have spent, now you might think, well, it's it's the capital city of England. I don't care. You should not spend 2 hours traveling 14 miles. I don't care what time of the day it is. And that's exactly how long you'll spend when I traveled from where I previously lived over to a friend of mine in another part of London. 14 miles, it takes you 2 hours. When I first came to London in 95, since then, the roads are visibly more congested. It's ridiculous. Many of them, I wonder, have they even got driver's license? The driving standards are so terrible, particularly, I'm sorry to say, but particularly among the Indian and Arab communities. And I think it's conjecture, but it wouldn't be beyond the realms of possibility if these people are protected under this politically correct cultural Marxist BS, where I think they're handing out driver's licenses to their own little groups and their own little ghettos, because they do all group together. The white people move out and they buy up all the houses, all the shops change. It's the same with with any immigrant population. They start up their own businesses and their own shops to cater for their own demographic. But the driving is terrible. And where I used to live, it was considered one of the most dangerous places to insure a car because of accidents and theft. Huge migrant populations there, both from the ex-communist countries, who have really lowered the tone in that area, and Bangladeshi, Indians, and Middle Eastern peoples. The driving standard is terrible. Side issue. But yeah, I mean, the congestion is just off the chart in London now.
Why is mainstream politics completely in denial on this subject?
I think for a number of reasons. One is I think some people are nervous about being thought of as racist if they talk about immigration. And I think that applies quite widely in the bureaucracy at sort of working level and lower levels. They just don't like to talk about it. And I think it applies in the BBC as well, as a matter of fact. But I think beyond that, we are approaching the point where the number of voters who are immigrants or who have a family abroad who they would like to come here and so on, I think they are becoming a significant factor, or will become a significant factor, in the calculations of the two major parties.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. No, I'm sure, and particularly in urban areas, some of which on the outer edges are marginal. I'm sure that's true. Finally, Lord Green, is there any prospect of Brexit doing anything to take back control of our borders?
Yes, if we achieve a clean Brexit, certainly it would be entirely up to us to decide who we were going to have here. And what we recommended is that we should only have people who would qualify for a work permit. That's highly skilled people. The rest should be either cut off completely or cut off over a period of time, because they don't add to our GDP per head, to our wealth per head. They add to our numbers, and that cancels out the contribution they make. So yes, it is perfectly possible to say we will only have the highly skilled. What we need is a government that has the balls to say it.
Right, thank you very much indeed. That was Lord Green of Deddington being very clear there that immigration has been completely out of control since the turn of the century, and that 82%, an incredible 5.4 million extra people in this country since 2001 because of immigration.
Okay, so that was Nigel Farage talking to Lord Green of Migration Watch. I mean, we're not exaggerating, folks, when we talk about this immigration problem. We're not being angry. Well, we are being angry, but we're not being uneducated, thick, bigoted, xenophobic, racist like the supporters of this mass immigration movement like to portray us as, and to dismiss our arguments. And again, it's a moral crusade to dismiss us as evil, xenophobic, racist. A study showed over a 15-year period that migrants took out 95 billion more in services than they put in taxation. I mean, a lot of the people who come here from the EU are doing coffee shop jobs and stuff like that, or working part-time in Sainsbury's and Tesco and all the rest of it. They couldn't possibly be putting back in, say, what they take out in the NHS and public services and schools for their children and everything else. I mean, it's so obvious. And this whole operation of multiculturalism and uncontrollable immigration is so counterintuitive to the national interest. A lot of them don't even speak English, which was previously an imperative to even, to even remotely survive economically for work. You had to speak English to get a job. Now your taxes are paid also to fund interpreters up at the local job centres, while these people are getting housed and benefits at the expense of the taxpayer as well. So, I mean, your taxes are actually funding your demographic destruction and demise. It would hardly motivate you to pay a lot of tax, would it? As I said, people used to have to speak English when they came into came into an English country. What a radical idea that is, just to survive. And as I say, that's not even counting the cultural impact and just the insult, really, that these people can come here and not even speak English, because they don't have to, and they can just survive quite easily because of benefits, or working with those others who work here and don't speak English. They can get there's all sorts of black market businesses where they're not paying taxes, and again, a blind eye is turned to a lot of this. Cheap labor, and of course, it's gladly permitted and facilitated in many cases, because, as I say, they are part of a nefarious conspiracy and agenda to destroy the West and to replace the native populations. It's depressing, but I think you have to be honest, if you're on the left and you're opposing this, to admit that these demographic shifts are of biblical proportion and are quite staggering for a nation which in its history had 50,000 Huguenots in the 12th century, I think, as a standout. Folks, that's it for today. I will be back next Thursday the 17th. Again, do support Revolution Radio. We rely on your support. We're 100% listener supported, and you can go to the homepage and donate there. Also, if you want to support my work, you can do that at PayPal, Stevenson_P5 at sky.com. My YouTube is Paul Stevenson. And again, there's lots of great videos up there with people like E. Michael Jones, Kevin McDonald, Andrew Joyce, Jeff Gates, who wrote the book, The Guilt by Association, how the Israeli lobby took over control of U.S. foreign policy. Gerald Celente I've had on quite a few times as well, talking about trends and trade wars and geopolitical issues, etc. So go there and subscribe and like the videos and share them out. And, the ones that I don't get censored, which is quite a lot of them recently. Heavy restrictions. I can't view them in this country and lots of other countries, and can't share them or see the comments or see the likes. But that's what we're dealing with, folks. Control freaks. But it'll backfire on them in the end. The dam is busting and they cannot hold it back forever. It's a sign of their desperation.